2 years ago, my friend Lamar took a martial arts class, and one of the things he learned in that class is a technique that you can use to disarm somebody who's holding a gun. And the technique he learned, it's a very simple one. You just take the assailant's wrist and you bend it backward, and then they can't hold it anymore. Now, to train himself in this movement pattern, he partnered up with somebody else in the class, and he practiced the movement. So he went to his partner, he bent his partner's wrist back, and then he took away a little plastic gun. Then he handed it back, then he did it again, and again, and again. And during the course of 20 minutes, he did this movement maybe 200 times or so. 2 days later, late in the evening on the streets of New York, this is a true story, he's walking along, and a man steps out of the shadows and holds my friend up at gunpoint. What do you think Lamar did in that moment when the gun was pointed at him? Just shout it out. What do you think? Okay, so, right. The actual answer is a two-part question. Many of you got the first part. So the first thing is, I wouldn't tell you the story if it wasn't true. He bent the assailant's wrist back, and he took the gun away. The question is, what happened after that? And sure enough, he handed the gun back, and he got shot in the foot. True story. Now, many of you are familiar with the neuroscience principle, which is illustrated in here. It's called neuroplasticity. And the basic idea is that when you practice a new skill or a movement pattern, the neurons inside your brain will actually rewire themselves so as to hardwire that capability into your unconscious mind. During the past decade or so, in the neuroscience community, we've gained a tremendous amount of understanding about what specifically happened in Lamar's brain, and more importantly, how to influence this process of neuroplasticity. But far more importantly, this technology has now progressed to the point where it's no longer theoretical and buried in laboratories. We can now use that technology in a practical way today to actually rewire your brain to fundamentally upgrade your experience of being human, to fundamentally upgrade your performance. In fact, to create Human 2.0. Something is just so excited about this topic, I have no idea what it is. You know, this is such an exciting topic. Look at what happened to the microphone. And that's only at the beginning, because I'm about to introduce the panelists, where the level will go even more high. And so I'd like to ask my three panelists to come up to the stage. I am incredibly honored and grateful to have the opportunity to have this panel discussion with three of my heroes in the neuroscience field. And what we're going to be describing is how this new technology of neuroscience is being used to create Human 2.0. Dr. Vivienne Ming, Dr. Amy Kruse, and Dr. Moran Cerf, three of my heroes and favorite people.
You know, I have to say, from the way you introduced the story, that with the mugger leaping out, that I assumed he got mugged by someone from the cast of West Side Story.
That's correct. I didn't share the song because my singing is not that good enough, but in fact there was singing and dancing in the story as well.
His dancing, those of you who saw him dancing last night at the party, is quite good. So.
I was channeling the mugger.
It was New York.
Very commonly when you prepare for panel discussions, the way it works is you ask someone a question, and then they talk, and then they stop, and then you ask someone else a question. We had a preparatory call, and it was just like this, where the minute it started, the conversation just took off. So what's going to happen is I'm going to ask a question to one of the three panelists. We'll find out who in a moment, and then we'll just see where the question goes. And I'm going to start with Dr. Cerf. So Moran, tell us a technology or finding that you're excited about, that you believe in the neuroscience world promises to change the human experience in a meaningful way.
So what's important to understand, what I'm going to say right now, is that everything I'm talking to you about is something that's happening right now. It's not like a philosophical idea that we're experiencing in like theoretical idea. We're actually trying. So here are a bunch of ideas that are really cool that are happening right now. First, as you can already tell from the second I speak very, very fast. even though I can pack a lot of words into a very short time, it's still very inefficient. It's still very, very slow. I have to think it, put the grammar, the verbs, use like my mouth to create the vibrations, transfer them. This is a very slow process until it actually gets into your mind. Right now we're playing with one idea, which is trying to find ways to communicate directly from one brain to another, bypassing the channel that is like slowing us down. So you can all think that's one. I'm gonna quickly just give you a few so we can start. So extra sensory perception is one. Another one is actually putting chips in the brain. So you heard the idea of DARPA to actually connect brains and machine. Trying playing with putting chips in our brain. At first, for people who have a disorder that the chips will actually help remedy. And the idea is that you record your brain activity when you're okay, and we learn how the brain works. And then when you're not okay, we actually turn on the chip, and the chip replaces the brain activity. This is prevalent right now in some studies that have to do with Alzheimer. When things don't work, we kind of bypass the bridge with a different one, so bypassing in the brain. A third one that's really, really cool. I'm going to do two more, and then we can talk, because I feel like I can hoard this easily. Sensory addition, a big topic that's right now getting a lot of attention, which is the idea that the brain has two things it knows how to do. One is to think cognitively and kind of process and solve problems, and one is to feel things and kind of get experiences without actually knowing how it does it. So right now, if you're feeling cold, a lot of sensors on your skin feel pressures and changes in temperature, and altogether your brain just feels cold. And the brain just takes all of it and makes it into one experience, but we don't know actually how it computes that. It's a lot of things that are happening in the brain that add up to a feeling. So we can take the systems that do that and have you feel things in the world that are cognitive. So you feel the market, you feel the entire cockpit of an airplane, and you just wouldn't know exactly how you think about it, but you'll feel that you have to take a left turn or a right turn. So right now we're playing with harnessing the brain's power to do complex things without knowing exactly how they work to do that. And the fourth one I'm going to end with is curing diseases that are mechanical in the body that the brain still knows how to operate. So you've probably seen a lot of people who lost limbs and have now regained control of their limbs because the brain is still intact and you just put a prosthetic. That's old news now. What we're playing with right now is curing deafness and curing blindness. So as long as your brain is okay, we can actually, play with curing that. And I'm not really a religious person, but as far as I can remember, the last guy to give sight to the blind got to be a hero for a lot of people. So I think we're playing with that.
Israeli also.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's the opening. Where are we going? All happening right now. So for everything I said, there's a paper published, an experiment being done. So it's not like a one day. It's now.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's really exciting. I've worked on algorithms for advancing cochlear implants. So these are systems that learn how to hear on their own. And what's really cool about doing that sort of work is you can train these things to do things that we can't. They can hear into frequencies we can't hear. You can train them to be specialists for noisy environments so they can pick out sounds. So, I mean, I know everyone here really wants bionics. It's just like a cover story that we're going to treat Alzheimer's. Yes, we can do that. In fact, really cool technology along this way for enhancement of memory is being able to actually pick up on memory failures in real time. In fact, faster than the person is aware of it, and then pre-queuing them so that they don't actually experience the failure in the first place, which you can imagine as Alzheimer's is advancing, not going through that experience of not recognizing your child for the first time and losing your sense of self. And so this whole space is just so fascinating. I'm going to throw in one sort of addition, which is there are some sort of unsexy spaces here that really benefit from the same application of AI and natural intelligence, which is 5 years ago, my son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, which really threw me for a loop. It came totally out of the blue, and so I hacked all of his devices on his body. His continuous glucose monitor, his insulin pump apparently broke several federal laws. And I built a system that actually predicts an hour into the future whether he will go low or high. And it used to push it to my Google Glass. So that was my prosthetic at the time, was a two-person prosthetic. But the cool thing is I simply went and gave talks about this. Now Eli Lilly is building what's called an artificial pancreas, which is basically a thermostat, except this one is including our predictive model in it. So it's a Nest thermostat, and it turns out in simulations it's better than the real thing.
Actually, I'd like to ask that you explain for this audience a little bit about how cochlear implants work, because I think if you think back to the talk that Brian gave, he was describing machine-computer person interfaces as if these are separate beings. But what's really interesting about what we've heard so far is that, in fact, this is a true symbiosis. And so if you could just walk into the mechanisms
absolutely.
and the neuroplasticity.
So here's the blunt reality of the origins of cochlear implants. You take a little bundle of wires, and you drill a hole in the skull, and you jam them in there. And that was it. And after someone died, you could radiograph them and see whether it actually touched any useful wire, any cabling in the brain. Essentially what you do is these tiny little filaments go through and they stimulate specific fibers in your 8th cranial nerve, your auditory nerve, which just happens to be kind of tuned a little bit like a piano. So by stimulating different nerve fibers, you create different percepts of frequency and pitch, more accurately. But for anyone here in this room, since none of you are little kids, here's an example of what you would hear. So you go through your life hearing the world like it's through a garbage disposal. And for a lot of people later in life that get these, they just turn them off because it's so awful. Musicians never listen to music again. But you put it in a little kid, particularly a baby, and when they grow up, you have to run experiments on them to tell they were ever deaf, kids that were profoundly deaf. So now the goal is, well, we know that the auditory nerve, way out in the end, has a tonotopy, like a piano. Well, so does parts of the thalamus, which is heading up this pipeway. So does the cochlear nucleus. So does the cortex. But we haven't totally figured out quite how, after all these years of study, quite how it all works. But people are starting to work now on direct cortical stimulation for retinal prosthetics, for cochlear prosthetics. But now they're going to be in the cortex, directly operating on the very things that are how we not just perceive the world, but even think about them.
So actually, I just wanted to add something in terms of we're talking now a lot about replacement of function, right? So whether it's a motor prosthetic or a cochlear implant or something on vision. And actually, one of the areas that's most exciting to me is the thought of expanding our perception and our sensory perception through these types of interfaces and implants. So a lot of times when we think about BCI, brain-computer interface, we think about replacing something, but we really haven't begun to explore the expansion of the senses. And so a lot of the prosthetics are directly tied to motor activity, but one of the things that we had discussed was starting to attach prosthetics and other implants to areas of the brain that were more associated with intention, right? So tying into a part of the cortex that's about predicting motion or deciding to take a motion, so you're not actually having to retrain the motor activity. You're actually sort of, we joked about maybe a third limb or maybe an extra hippocampus. And so I think one of the areas that we have to think about as we expand into this space is not just replacement of function, but expansion of function, and that's where I'm most excited.
We certainly know about the third limb, because
right.
in the work on macaques, they don't actually just sort of
right.
mainly paralyze them,
right.
but they just tie their arms down, and then later they untie them and they can move a separate
right.
robotic limb in the three.
Right.
But they're referring to work at Caltech where they're plugging into parietal instead of motor, and you're thinking move the arm in a sense. Right. In the parietal cortex, it's more like Dr. Octopus. It's like
right.
it's your id is reaching out and grabbing things because it's just reading out what some people refer to as the sort of the little economist homunculus in the brain that's actually valuing the world. So the robot is making the decision about how to move and interact, but it's doing it based on your preferences.
Right.
Amy, you're next.
Oh.
So Amy,
yes.
I'm going to repeat the question.
Good.
Describe a research finding or a technology about which you are really excited that promises to fundamentally change the human experience in the near term.
Oh, how to pick
Ready?
How to pick just one.
Go.
So for me, where sort of my mind is expanding to is actually the work that's happening with groups and expert teams. So like Brian, I was a program manager at DARPA, and I had a program called Accelerated Learning. And in the Accelerated Learning program, we did a couple things with individuals, but we actually, as the sort of second part of the program, actually looked at expert teams And the most amazing thing about looking at these expert teams, right, is their brains actually reflect their performance as experts together, right? So they actually form a synchronization both at the physiological and at the brain level that you can see clearly between sort of novice and expert teams. And so one of the things that we're working on now is actually decoding what allows people to both sort of achieve that group synchronous state as well as ways of driving that in teams, both small teams and large teams, and between individuals. And so for me, I think this is a huge space because we've all had that sense of, you know, sort of being on the same page with someone or being on the same wavelength. You're in a meeting, it's really flowing, it's really working, it's going, and no kidding, your brain would reflect that, right? So if I put EEGs on all of us as we're, you know, sort of brainstorming and coming together on these things, and if we're really in the zone, we're actually going to see that. And so from a connectivity perspective, as neuroscientists, we've done so much on the individual, but now we're starting to understand how we interact together as individuals and how we can quantify that and accelerate that sort of connectivity. So I'm very excited about that space.
There was a great paper that just came out recently, which I forwarded to you guys, actually looking at students. So a lot of work I do is in education, and you wouldn't necessarily, well, I guess everyone thinks about, well, I want to just download Spanish. That sort of thing, I will contradict anyone that says differently. We're not downloading whole abilities and knowledge bases into our brain anytime soon. But massively accelerated learning, where you're learning in sort of a normal fashion, but we're hugely accelerating the process, is a real possibility. So in this case, they were putting EEG on a whole class of students and watching them over time, and they could actually see the neural signatures, the commonalities of patterns that predicted learning in these kids. Right. But also you can look at other types of domains. So to kind of merge a couple things together, it talked about the sort of mind reading idea and connecting brains together. Well, it turns out we do that already. When we're having a really good conversation, a good discourse, you get what's called temporal lobe synchrony, where it's like this magic phenomenon where our brains are literally phase syncing with one another. And it's not ESP, it's just that I have a model of you and you have a model of me, and when it's a really good model, they're in sync. Right. And it turns out a big predictor not just of the quality of linguistic discourse, right, but of theory of mind. And the development of our ideas about other people and empathy. Oh, yeah. So what happens now if you start to link a bunch of people together so that they genuinely understand one another? Like they're feeling that empathetic connection immediately. Guess what? The more cognitively similar you are, you get that for free. But what if you could get it for everyone? Yeah. And then on the flip side, and then I'll shut up, the neural signature of skepticism. It's actually highly desirable in teams. You don't want people to just arbitrarily agree. And here's the other thing, people that are more cognitively similar to you, you will just arbitrarily agree with them by comparison to people that are more different. So people bringing different ideas into your life, you will be more skeptical of them, you'll be less trusting of them, but actually that can be a really great thing in team decision making and being able to pick up that signature where you're just starting to coast and you're heading towards a big bubble in your decision making. You can actually pick that up when we record as a team. Right.
So I'm going to ask you the same question, Vivienne, but there's not going to be time for commentary. But I want to pose the same exact question, and then we're going to do a lightning round. But just beginning, describe one technology which hasn't been mentioned or research finding about which you are excited that is going to fundamentally change the human experience.
Just one. Okay, so there was actually a paper that just came out this week, and so this is real findings, but I am getting a little ahead of where the technology is right now. They were looking at working memory, and they were profiling it in exquisite detail. So your working memory span, which is an incredibly complex idea, but let's take the original famous paper about it, the magic number 7 plus or minus 2. So let's say you can remember about 7 things plus or minus 2. If you're 9, oh my goodness, you will have such an advantage of your life. Because this is the same system. It isn't just about what you can remember. Right. It's the complexity of an argument you can follow. It is how expansive your imagination is. It serves so much. You will make more money, you'll live longer, you'll go further in your education, probabilistically speaking. If you're a 5, boy, it doesn't mean you can't be a CEO someday, but life is stacked against you. It's one of the great things that our current president has done, is proved that you can go far. So
I was going to say, yeah, a short working memory circuit doesn't mean you can't be a CEO.
although
right?
let's throw that out there for the press also. So I think we are moving towards a world where we can intervene on really complex constructs like working memory. I'm not saying it's tomorrow, but there's fundamental research in this space. And what would it be, as it said on my personal website for about 25 years now, if instead of 7 plus or minus 2, it was 20? When the highest you will ever meet on any college campus of a neurotypical person is probably in the low teens.
Thank you. And now we move to the lightning round to talk about something practical. This is kind of like the jetpack. So here's the question. In 60 seconds for each of you, I'd like you to describe a neuroscience breakthrough that within the next 2 years will be able to be used by the people in this audience to fundamentally upgrade either their performance or their experience. And
How many rounds are we going to do?
it depends how long you guys talk.
You said 60 seconds.
So
Okay.
I'm not going to do the math. Because Amy, I've never known you to do. So you go first, and I'll time you and see if you can do it. And I'll interrupt you in 60 seconds. Go.
So one of the things that I think is a fundamental game changer, right now people are doing it from a DIY perspective, but brain stimulation. So you've heard of transcranial direct current stimulation. Folks have been playing around with this for quite some time. But we have very good evidence from the literature that we can actually improve attentional focus, improve your perception of targets in a crowded environment. And so while it is migrating from sort of both the clinical or research space and the DIY space, we're getting really close to something that is sort of ready for prime time. So I'm going to predict that brain stimulation in individuals at home to accelerate and enhance their sensory perception and learning is going to happen.
You heard it here first. Moran.
There's a saying by Bill Gates, people overestimate 20 years future and underestimate 2 years. I'm going to overestimate 2 years. So I think with the idea of putting chips in people's brains, we're going to start doing the following things. So I think that first of all, you see kind of NFL players talking in this remote to the coach. I think we're going to start having it direct to the brain in 2 years. So you're going to have only just a speaker, but it's going to be directly to you, so you would have it. That's one thing that's going to do with the chip. I think that the same chip is going to be used to outsource some thinking. And the cool thing about that is that right now, if I have a mobile phone and I want to do mathematics, I kind of open my phone, I do mathematics. It still feels like there's me doing mathematics with the phone, so it's external. The magic of the brain is that once you put stuff in the brain and it wires correctly, the brain immediately feels it's part of it. So you don't feel, okay, I'm outsourcing the mathematics to this part. It just feels like it's the way you do mathematics right now. You just think it and it's happening in your brain. You don't feel like you're a heart transplant. You don't feel it's me controlling this heart. It's just you. So I think that once we put the chip in the brain and the brain integrates with that, and the brain is amazing in taking things that you plug into it and just learning how to speak to them, once we have that, you're going to just do better. And I think that do better is going to be exponential. So it won't be like we're going to just do mathematics faster. We're going to do mathematics much better, and it would feel we're just going to have a generation that does mathematics very well. So 2 years from now, chips in the brain, and with it, all the advantages of having an iPhone inside your head.
So Andy and Jenny, when you prepare for glimpses in 2 years, talk to Moran and we can see if we can get the audience hooked up with that. Exactly.
Yeah,
Okay, Vivienne, your turn.
exactly. We'll just project it right to you.
It's a lot of work.
So I am a true believer both in AI in general and in neuroprosthetics, but I'm going to pick something that I actually think will happen in the next 2 years. There was a recent paper showing that direct current stimulation could increase truthfulness in people. You look at the extensive use of things like face recognition system and tracking systems throughout China, and I think it's reasonable to assume that tyrants around the world will start using direct current stimulation systems to enhance the malleability and truthfulness of their populations.
And on that uplifting note, by the way, isn't this stuff fucking cool? So let me turn it over to you. And ask you to ask questions of this magnificent panel. Big voice, stand up, you're first.
Hi there. So you were talking about wonderful things of adding to our ability to think, compute with our heads or our bodies. But we all know that we need sleep. And sleep is a process that we don't really understand how it actually enhances our ability to go even higher the next day. Could you comment on how you're integrating that into some of your studies?
Yeah.
I want to start. So I want to take one person. So I spend a lot of my time right now looking at one part of sleep.
Sleeping? No.
So sleep is not a uniform thing. Sleep has a lot of things. I think the rest of the panel is going to speak about sleep. I'll tell you just one thing that we do right now that's kind of blowing people's minds, recording dreams and changing them. So this is not really part of what you think about sleep. This is the part of the sleep that is not really about getting better. It's about maybe simulating the future and thinking about it. But what we're doing right now in my lab, already happening frequently, is we take people, have them go to sleep, we decode the visuals of their dreams, so we can say, when you wake up, you usually forget your dreams, we tell you, actually, what you dreamt of was this, 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 and this. And you kind of bring it back to you, and what we're playing it right now is actually changing it. So we use smells, which is a really good mechanism to penetrate your sleep without waking you up, to actually inject a narrative into your brain, and you wake up, and we tell you what you were going to dream. And what's cool about that, that's where I'm going to end and let other people speak about the sleep other parts. What's cool about that is that more and more we have evidence that in this window of 5 to 15 minutes over the night when you're dreaming, your brain kind of think about the future and decide what to do with that. And in injecting new narratives, we actually wake you up with different perception of life. So what we did right now, 2 years ago now, it came out, was took people who are smokers, came to the lab, went to take a nap for 2 hours, woke up not wanting to smoke. And overnight, we basically blasted their brain with the smell of nicotine, with the smell of rotten eggs. We paired them. There's a lot of mechanics to do that, to actually rewire the brain over the 5 minutes window that we get. But if you do it in the right time, in the right windows, you wake up, and for about a week, they drop from X to 0 cigarettes. And that's just one thing. We're trying to play now with food, making you eat healthy, making you relieve of post-traumatic stress and so on, but that's only the 5 minutes of dreams. Now I'm going to let other people think about actually you get better.
I just wanted to interject on that you're making me think some mashup ideas here where we combine this with the on-demand economy, and you can mechanical Turk your dreams to Amazon for AWS. And
so one of the things
people
we're playing
can
with
use
right
it
now,
for computation purposes.
that's going to be creepy. That's going to be the creepy thing. I'm going to one of the creepy thing we're playing with right now, it doesn't work well yet, but it's kind of working beyond what we expected, is playing with dead people's brain. So it turns out when you die, for the next 7 hours, your brain is still doing things. It's still before it decays entirely, it's still working. So we played with a few people's brain after they died, having their brain compute things for us. So we kind of, tell you if there's a picture of a cat in a video of YouTube, yes or no, just with the person's, so you can think about you, even when you're dead, you're still valuable for scientists a little bit when it comes to doing things. And that's
You're right, that is creepy. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So just to anchor it back very quickly to the sleep stuff, right? We know that there are certain aspects of sleep that actually help us encode memories, right? And so right now what we're actually doing is playing around with, again, while people are taking naps, think of power naps, right? We're actually enhancing certain frequencies, right? Slow wave sleep or REM sleep, and actually getting people to remember things longer, because sleep is very important for the encoding of memories. And so I think what you're going to see is both people playing around with their own sleep waveforms, whether that's decoding dreams or perhaps trying to make sleep more effective. And I think you're also going to see the increase in the use of napping and power napping to actually enhance and sort of facilitate learning.
I feel like there's a whole new market here for sleep porn, where you open the app and you stimulate, you direct all of your dreams towards.
I want to buy the next dream from Spielberg.
Right, that's next year for Andy.
Yeah,
we have time for one more question, and I'm going to have to go to the back to Brian.
So I may have missed, when you talk about working memory being such a key indicator of life in general, is there any research that's been done or any efforts right now on actually improving capacity for working memory, or is that just
there are some somewhat notoriously actually kernel. This is Brian Johnson's, the Braintree founder, somewhat famously along with Elon Musk, they've each started a neuroprosthetics company. Kernel was initially based around work at USC, looking at how to connect the hippocampus towards other forms of storage and essentially be a prosthetic for degenerative forms of memory failure. So certainly that works there. It's a complex system to intervene on. Here's the thing. We know at a molecular level how things like childhood household stress and isolation decrease working memory span. So it would be amazing if we could combat against those sorts of things, which suggest even simple things like being able to modulate your stress could have some profound impact for prophylactic against cognitive decline over time.
We have seen evidence from I will caveat this by saying high quality cognitive training and brain training exercises that you can increase your working memory. You're not going to go from 9 to 20 with those types of exercises. I think you're going to have to do something a little bit more extraordinary than that. But in general, for the average Joe and Jane, you can certainly train yourself to do that. Something that came up while I was thinking about both what you had said about maybe evildoers elsewhere in the world. I was having a conversation this week with a colleague about, we've talked a lot about enhancement, but we haven't actually talked a lot about neuroprotection. And so I think one of the emerging areas that I'm certainly interested in, I think we're going to hear later today, the last panel on Humanity 2.0, about sort of how do we protect our brains against potentially some of the onslaughts that people are going to be coming at us with. As people get better at neuromarketing, how do I get better at neuroprotecting myself from some of those targets? And I think that's a really key issue that we absolutely, the research is right now, but it needs to get huge.
I think if I had one sort of design concept that I would love to see injected throughout AI and all of our experiences in the digital world, but particularly with prosthetics, is not only you better when I switch it on, but when I switch it off, you're better than you were before. So these prosthetics should always be challenging. They should they should never be replacing what you should do, what you can do. Only extending it, and extending it in a way which causes you to grow. Now, I don't think people will default to building such a thing.
Yeah.
I think we really have to insist that that is what the technology is.
So I'm very grateful to say Andy gave us 5 more minutes, and so we have time for, I think, a couple more questions, and so, yes.
Hi, I'm really interested in knowing what we could do from an elite athleticism perspective, what people like, you take an NBA player, what he can be doing to optimize his brain from a neuroscience perspective.
Right. So there's a lot. It's actually sort of an unexploited area in a lot of elite athletics right now. And so I think there are going to be things that are going to be both what I'll call sport independent. So essentially increasing someone's visual processing speed, right? Increasing their field of view, the amount of things that they're able to track or predictions or patterns that they're able to decode in real time. And then I think there are going to be things that are sort of sport specific, right? So if you're looking at the NBA, you may actually be able to work on very specific motor skills. If you're looking at baseball, you may be able to sort of look at the how people understand the pitch and how fast that is. I mean, so many things in sport are fast and faster than sort of we can, sort of verbally train someone. I think we're starting to see increasing use of both simulation, maybe avatars, in terms of sort of training motor skills from a mirroring perspective rather than, again, a verbal coaching perspective. That's some of the stuff that comes to mind. David, did you?
Yeah, actually, I'd love to add. There was a paper that came out with the Orlando Magic and visual processing speed, so just speaking about basketball in particular, and the findings, which were done independently, were stunning. I mean, I don't remember, it was like 20 more steals a game and 30 more points a game. And this is at the, at the NBA level. But the other thing I think there's immediate applicability for has to do with what Amy was talking about with group synchrony.
Yeah.
Because in all team sports, the idea is the team has to function as one. And one guy or woman goes out of rhythm, and it just screws up the entire team.
Yeah.
And I think the one other thing is stress management,
Oh, yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So if you're playing basketball, you get fouled, you've got 3 seconds where your frontal cortex is just completely off.
Right.
And you can win or lose games based on that, and that's completely retrainable.
Right.
Okay, one more question, yes.
I had a 2-part question. One was, in 2 years from now, Dr. Cerf, do you think you'll be sitting there with a brain implant and you're prepared to
She already has one, actually.
Your physiology, and the second question was, what are the consequences? Because everything is connected.
Yeah, a big homeostasis machine.
Consequences of maybe significantly enhanced vision. Could your body chemistry change as a consequence of that?
So here's how I vision it. Great question. So here's the way I think. First of all, I think the progress will happen first and foremost with people who need it for clinical purposes. So it would be not for all of us first. It's going to be for Alzheimer, for disorders that's what my team does. We take patients that have a problem, and in the course of treating them, we actually do things. So that's going to be the population that's going to start. But once they're going to have an advantage, I think it's going to be prevalent. So I think that the analogy that I give sometimes when I ask similar things is go back 60 years ago. The idea of changing the human body was horrendous. People said, like, this is a sacred thing that I received from God. What do you mean, like, you're going to put stuff in my body? And then 60 years later, I think 1 out of 4 girls ask for a breast implant age 16. So it's starting with some person doing that, and then it becomes really quickly. So I think the story I can tell is the following. One wealthy San Francisco tech guy is going to just do it without any permission. He's going to put a chip in his brain, and he's going to start doing high-frequency trading faster than anyone else in his brain and make more money. Then it's going to start spreading across his friends, and then before long, it's going to be something that everyone can't live without. So I don't think it's going to be like one day the government is going to decide that it's going to be like organically the way breast implants happen. Like one girl, and suddenly it became a thing. So that's now. That's kind of how I envision things happening.
I don't know about you, but I think that's an appropriate place to end the panel discussion. It's like breast implants.
Thank you, everyone. Can we get this back up?